Hey Brobot, welcome back to part 2, the details, where the real work on bringing this finish happens. To explain this finish, I wanted to express a tight, scale-appropriate Japanese magazine finish on this one. They tend to show these mobile suits in a relatively new or just lightly used condition, and the weathering, if applied, is quite restrained and with the idea in mind that these are in 1/100 scale. Many of the examples we have seen published in magazines and books in English have been finished by modelers whom are very good at armor modeling, with their finishes scaled for the popular 1/35th scale. To my eye, they tend to over-exaggerate their mecha finishes, and to get the Japanese look, we need to shrink that down almost 3 times to get close to scale appropriate. And that's why you'll hear me mention that quite a few times during this video. Let me share with you how I did it on the Lupus Rex. Let's go. 1. Decals. Our first step is to apply waterslide decal, or decals. You can choose how you want to say it, they're the same things. Decals are a wonderful tool for scaling, detailing, and tightening up a finish. They also help to add that touch of realism by way of transposing what we know is on a real machine, and the models we've made out of them, onto our sci-fi subjects, like Gundam. Here you can see I have a number of decal sheets, both from Bandai and aftermarket too, mostly from Haikyuu parts and in various colors and scales. Choosing your colorway and theme is quite important and should be an extension of your existing theme. Here I will start with black, following my plan for the Lupus Rex being both tight and high contrast. Cutting the decal out, I used 2 methods. Either fine sharp scissors, I really like these Tamiya decal scissors, they are perfect for the job, or if it's inside the sheet, I use a very fine craft blade. This one also happens to be from Tamiya. Yes, big fanboy, love their tools. Carefully cut the chosen decal out and place it in a small dish of tap water, face down. I do this to be able to see the back paper wet out, and I give it around 30 seconds. Then, whilst this is happening, I get my decal solution ready. Personally, I like this one, Mr. Mark Setter, probably because I've used it the most. Double check the bottom has been mixed properly and that the cap is on tight before shaking it. No, I've never had mishaps, I promise. Add a little to the spot you want to place your decal, and then using a soft brush, damp with either water or decal solution, both works, gently brush it into place. I try not to rush, but do keep in mind the clock is ticking. As the decal starts to dry, it becomes more difficult to move, and the chance of tearing it, especially for larger decals, increases slightly, depending on which of the solutions you've used. As I have no guide, I don't think there is a guide available for decals on the Lupus Rex. I am using the sense and judgment I have learned from working on other mecha properties to place them. As an additional theme, I want a good number of decals, but not too many as to make it toy-like. This is a tough call and some experience is needed. I do suggest making a couple of the Maschinenkrieger spacesuits to learn about decal placement, as they have quite a few. Step 2, the panel lines. Now here is the main event for this model, the panel lining. It's usually a background feature on most designs, but for the way the Lupus is put together and for our paint scheme this time, it's going to be all about these tight, focused panel lines. Let's kick it old school and use these Tamiya enamels and check out if they are still useful and relevant. I'll be using the classic Tamiya X20 enamel thinner with these paints, and a quick word of caution, make sure to only use this thinner on painted parts. It's a little on the hot side. If you're only going to use one color for panel lining, on white mecha I would suggest this one, XF63 German Grey. It's a dark warm grey and looks fantastic in contrast with white as shown on this piece. However, because I am so fancy, I'm going to use a mix of 3 colors and share with you how. We could use plastic lids, but since we're going old school, I've pulled out these traditional Japanese tin mixing trays. So much nostalgia with these things. Let's mix up our other tones using XF10 brown and give it a tray, clean our stirrer, and also one for X1 black gloss. Equally, you can also use XF1 flat black. The main differences being obviously the sheen, but also gloss black flows a little more freely and dries with a touch more transparency. I urge you to experiment with both to get a feel for the different effects they produce. Now, organizing ourselves, we have one tray for each color and then two mixing trays out front. One will be for clean thinner and the other one for making custom mixes. As a general strategy and theme for this model, I plan to use the grey higher up and then mixes including brown and black as we move further down. The brown will be used in areas to indicate notions of dirt and rust in the base. For the deepest details, we can then use mostly black gloss. Let's start off with the top of the leg here and go with straight grey. Pre-wetting with clean thinner is a good technique to allow the wash to move freely along the panel line through capillary action. Then drop the grey in over the top like this. Boom! If your wash is very thin, you may not need this. Please experiment with both ways of doing this for added variance and interest on your model. I'm not cleaning my brush between mixes. You guys know that. Simply moving straight onto my next color, in this case, gloss black, and mixing it up. You can feel that the properties are ever so slightly different and that it is runnier, for want of a better term. I just wish they had gloss versions of the other colors as well. Let's drop it into details like this. There we go, a nice heavy detail there done. Boom! Moving lower down the leg, and as my brush starts running out of paint, I'm planning to top it up with a brown based mix. Again, no cleaning here, mixing up the brown, let's deposit into the mixing tray along with some grey and black gloss to make up this dark and dirty custom panel line wash. As I hold it up, you can see that it contains undertones of dirt or rust with the brown. It's very cool. Now, it may not be super obvious at first as we work on this that it's a custom color, but it does add to the overall effect, an impression at the end. Our brains know it's more than one straight color, even though our eyes can't tell us exactly, or some folks looking at it may not understand this concept yet. We just know it's interesting and lifelike, which adds to the illusion of the reality of the mecha shown. Showing you here in real time, you can see that I am quite careful and methodical. You don't have to work in this way, but for the theme of being tight, disciplined and restrained with the finish, I am using it as an opportunity to exercise those qualities within myself. Sure, we could just slather it on with gunk wash and come back and clean it all off, and that might be fine for another time. This one is about practicing restraint, and that quality will be apparent in the finish. You will feel that I painted this with care, discipline, and mastery of fine work, and they are the feelings I am attempting to evoke with this finished piece. Yes, I do apologize if I'm ruining your image of me about being that dirty weathering guy, but I have a little bit of range. If you look closely, you can see that there is now a gradient on the piece, from the clean grey at the top to the slightly dirty looking panels further down. This helps scale our mecha. Here on this piece, you can see another mixed panel line approach, starting with grey for the top details, then adding black gloss here for the deeper details, and then grey around them, which will then mix in and slightly change the effect. Then the custom sludge mix, that's what I'll call it, the grey, brown and black, towards the bottom here to add that gradient across our piece, and finishing up with black for the deep details on the bottom. On this foot armor piece, let's start directly with our custom sludge mix from the start. We can imagine that if anywhere on our mobile suit is going to be dirty, it's the feet. And the brown tinge here, the red-brown tinge, is perfect for the idea of Lupus Rex being on Mars. Lastly, cleaning up the panel lines. Very important part of this. First, here's an example of before and after. Here's how they can look after we've tidied them up. And here's how they looked before. Tools required are, first, 1, a soft brush, and 2, a makeup brush. This is a very cheap one from Daiso. A Q-tip or cotton bud will also work here. And 3, the same Tamiya X20 thinner, which I will place a few drops of here in my tray. Now here is the magic part of the Tamiya enamels. Even after a couple of days of sitting like this on the model, they have not cured. They will still reactivate and clean up. Wow, right? Quick word of warning to our Humbralisters. Yeah, Nate, that means you, mate. Don't leave Humbrals for more than an hour or two because they do cure and are very difficult, if not nigh impossible, to clean up. And the Humbrol thinner is wicked hot, almost as if it's Bandai Plastic's arch nemesis. Please be careful if you go that route, but yes, I will think highly of you because it's so manly. With the soft brush damp with thinner, gently reactivate the areas you want to clean and remove them to some kitchen paper. Avoid the temptation to flood the panel lines with thinner. This can lead to removing the panel lines altogether and then you are back to the start again. You can see here that by ever so slightly feathering the wet paint, it gives a nuance of weathering that is correct for the scale. This is exactly the effect I'm after here. If you want it to look more sharp and clean, simply wipe it all off, either with the soft brush or the makeup brush or Q-tip if that's all you've got. As your brush accumulates paint, wipe it on your paper to keep it nice and clean. This helps us in achieving this sharp yet graduated panel lines that gives a pleasing effect of scale. In a way, we can think of this as painting the unnecessary paint off, making it less but better, removing for perfection. For some sections, particularly at the top of pieces where I would like them to be cleaner and brighter, I will use the makeup sponge to achieve a cleaner wipe, like this. Helps it to become nice and sharp. In my mind, there are basically two versions of panel lines, sharp and blurred. Here, I have gone with a very finely blurred panel line. Yes, that sounds a little counterintuitive and somewhat contradictory, but it's part of my idea to have this looking 1/100 scale and microing down the effects. Step 3. The Lupus green detail. The Barbatos small detail changes from red to green for the two Lupus variants, and it's a very nifty little detail, and I was excited to try something a tad different on this one. Green candy effect as a panel line wash. Super happy with how it turned out, and it's very easy. Let me share it with you. First step is a reflective metallic base. Anything will work here, I think. A silver enamel would be quite nice, but I didn't have one. So let's try out hand painting these Vallejo metal colors, and they have a chrome. Much yes! Then let's layer Tamiya clear green over it. Again, enamel would work nicely here over the acrylic, but I do not has. So we'll need to wait 24 hours for the Vallejo paint to cure, and we should be good. In legit Vallejo YouTube tutorial style, I'm using an old washed plastic lid as a palette. Our mate Jose would be very proud of me. It's actually really nice paint too. It contains a shaker ball for fast mixing and comes out thin and ready to go. Smells that it has an alcohol base. Touch our brush in water and let's go. You can see I'm freehanding this unsupported. Key is to have at least one hand grounded in contact with your surface, say your table, to keep it steady and to use a nice pointed brush. This is the second of the Leon Hardy sables I picked up from Hobbyco, coming up on 2 years back, and it still has a lovely, useful point. So consider these brushes tested. I will sometimes hold my breath slightly and am careful not to overload the brush. It's not a high capacity brush like a Winsor Newton, for example, so I do like it for this sort of precise work as there is less risk of paint zipping off the brush and flooding the detail. But having said that, it's just more about practicing with the brushes that you use to learn their handling characteristics. For the tail, the detail is very, very fine, so I've gone with a brand new Tamiya HF brush, the smallest size. Carefully. And oops! A quick word on recovery. If you do happen to get a little bit of paint outside the lines, not to fear. A quick wipe of a soft alcohol-based thinner will take it off, and as we've used a lacquer paint as our primary coat, So long as we are gentle, it will take the acrylic paint off and leave the primary coat in a pristine condition. Oh, the magic! Fast forward 24 hours and our Vallejo chrome has hopefully cured, and we can now wash over it with Tamiya's clear green, thinned with Mr. Hobby's Hobby Color Thinner, roughly 2 parts thinner for one paint. This one has been my favorite for a few years now. Once I discovered it also thins Tamiya acrylics perfectly, it was one less bottle and solvent to keep in supply. Less but better. Let's use a higher capacity brush this time. It's a Tamiya Modeling Brush Pro. This one's a sable, it's a number 0, and has a much fatter belly, so will hold much more thin paint, perfect for delivering a thin wash. Working as if this is a kind of funky green panel line, I very carefully touched the thin green into the recessed detail, and it flowed perfectly and did not bother the underlying chrome at all. Mission success! And it already looks really good. Step 4. Chipping and weathering. Final stage here, let's do some chipping and slight weathering with Tamiya XF1 Flat Black. Initially, I had planned to swap out to water-based acrylics for this last stage, but seeing as I had come so far with the old school Tamiyas, it felt entertaining to me just to see how far I could keep going with them, and it turns out it was all the way through to completion. Go Tamiyas! I thought it was also interesting to share with you guys that you can do chipping very last, I think especially on Gunpla. In a play out of my lacquer hand painting book, I'm reusing the grey panel line wash dish and adding that flat black to it, so it will be a slight custom mix, but because I'm not adding thinner, it probably won't reactivate a great deal. We can work without thinner in this case because I want the paint to be nice and thick. Using this old beat up flat brush, I'll clean some of the thick paint off the stirrer, and that loads my brush at the same time. All the time savings. This works best if we unload some of the wetter paint to some kitchen paper to keep the chipping nice and refined. I've shown this technique before and jokingly called it the Link Wide Fence Brush Technique. It's not quite dry brushing and not quite brush painting either. It's just using the interesting parts of a brush to work for us. For example, here on the hard edges, we use the flat of the brush, and then in other sections, we can use the brush like a stamp to produce a different and unique effect. The main things to keep in mind here as you work is that you need a thicker paint. Thicker than you might imagine, and to control yourself, yes, I'm going to say it, use restraint. Don't go nuts and overdo this, a little bit at a time, and pace and check yourself. Now, for mistakes, if you happen to not like some of your work, we can easily work it back. You can either feather it in like this with a clean brush damp with thinner, and if you'd like it cleaned further, break out the makeup brush and give it a wipe. Just be really careful of the panel lines if you haven't flat coated it, which in this case I haven't. It wasn't necessary, and I love the thrill of pointless risk. Plus, it's just a thing of mine. I prefer to have as few flat coats on the model as possible, and it's probably why my cans of Mr. Super Clear have lasted so long. Next, let's change up and use a round pointy brush, mainly because it's in my hand. Seriously, this is studio style working. There's never a perfect brush, so I roll on with what's in my hand and make it work until it's not working, and then I will look for another one. An edge is an edge, and in this case, and for this finish, this is going to be 90% of our chipping, the edging work. But I will add the odd dot mark every now and then for a touch of vital variety. A little heavier on the feet. They're actually also weapons, pile drivers, and because it's a 20-meter tall mobile suit, if it was real, the feet must take quite a bit of a beating. Corners, edges, mark your targets, and work lightly and quickly. Wow, finally a legit mistake. This was actually fun for me because I can show real recovery instead of needing to invent it. Simple. Brush down, get some thinner ready, and touch the makeup sponge to it, and look at this. Boom, just wipes off. Leave just a touch of it visible for some perfect scale appropriate weathering. Lastly, the lower arms and hands, and I've gone super micro here, just to see how much I could refine it down. It's likely lost overall, but we know it's there now, and something we can add to another model in the future. Cool. Wrapping up, and there we have it, a nice, tight and simple finish. Nothing fancy, detailed with old school products, and yet Lupus Rex looks fantastic, even saying it myself. I love this finish. So Tamiya's are totally still relevant and wonderful to use. It's a lovely opportunity to become reacquainted with them after many years. It's like meeting an old friend. Hope this two-part series on the Lupus Rex gives you some cool ideas to try out on your next Gunpla. But of course, you can apply these techniques to any model with great results too. More soon. Thanks as always, Brobots. See ya. Big thanks to Hobbyco and Little Robot. I do my best to buy from and support local businesses to keep our money in our communities and to empower physical events. I get to meet you guys and hang out. Fun. A sincere heartfelt thanks to our top patrons: Ivan, Grant, Con, Jack, RJ, Mr. Tweets, Matthias, Peter, Robert, Kelso, Kevin, David, Derek, Dominic, Nick, and welcome Danny. This episode was supported by you. Your support empowers me and makes all this happen. Sincerely, thank you very much, guys. More soon.